Hey everybody, I'm Sean Robinson,
I'm Carson Grubaugh.
and we're living the line. And today we are going to be taking a look at some sexy, sexy robots.
Yeah, this
Carson,
is I'm not super into robots. Only what's his name? Soriyama. I get into some Soriyama robots. But this is getting me there.
yeah. So, man, let me take a look at this
It's
upside
upside
down
down.
book here. Mobile Suit Gundam: The Origin. The Origin. Make sure you get the right book. Okay, this is by Yoshikazu uh, Yasuhiko. I'm gonna say his name one more time. Yoshikazu Yasuhiko. I apologize in advance. I'm going to say it as best as I can. Have you ever read any of his stuff, Carson?
No, and honestly have zero Gundam background either. Like I'll admit to you when I was looking at this, I looked at like the it seemed kind of contemporary, more contemporary. And I looked at the publication date and saw 2001, and I was like, "Isn't Gundam like really old?" And I asked Tori, and like she knows more about it than I do. She was like, "Oh, yeah, that's like an old cartoon." So I'm
Yeah.
total zero on all of this.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to get you up to speed really quick. Okay.
Yeah, why
So,
this book, Sean?
so why this book is a slightly different thing as why this Gundam, or where the fuck did Gundam come from? Two different things. I apologize for saying the F word so early in our video. I usually wait until we've gone about 20 or 30 minutes. And all the people who are not going to watch the whole thing get to hear me say it, but I'm just going to go ahead and just dive right in. Uh, so, so the thing is, Gundam is a really interesting thing. It's an interesting phenomenon. If you trace like the history of giant robots, um, there's a lot of sort of cartoony and fantastic giant robots in Japanese comic and animation history. Um, you know, in throughout the 60s and 70s. But there's a certain strain of giant robot that really came out of, in my estimation, like the Leiji Matsumoto stuff. Leiji Matsumoto is a fantastic uh, uh, cartoonist whose work inspired a bunch of different series. And when you see a series like Star Blazers, that was based on his designs. And, he did a Captain Harlock, and he did Galaxy Express 999, and all of these things that became animated series that were incredibly influential to other stuff. Well, one of the things that those influenced was the original Gundam series that came out in 1979 to 1980. And this was a wild runaway success. And it's the first, I would say, one of the first like realistic, let's use quotes here, realistic giant robots, as in somebody's using basic physical principles to design a giant robot that might be able to move and fight and has explanations for why it's doing the thing that it's doing. And it was an actually really, engaging anime series. And it was a huge success, and they had like 4 different compilation movies that are incredibly highly regarded. Compilation movies meaning that they took this 59 or 49 episode series, and they compressed it into these movies that were then reanimated essentially. So they'd use the exact same foundational animation, but they'd redraw it on a bigger scale so that it looked great projected. And they had 4 of these series recap videos. And one of the animators who worked on that was a gentleman named Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, otherwise known as Yaz. Let's just call him Yaz. He signs his work
That works
that
for
way.
me. Please.
And Yaz worked on the original Gundam. He was the character designer. And so he was the person who went through and designed the look of all the characters. I don't believe he did any of the mech designs. He didn't design the robots or anything like that. But so basically, skip ahead a little bit. Transformers, completely ripped off from Gundam.
I was going to ask that
Uh,
because when we look at the cover, it's Optimus Prime.
yeah. So this design was around in the 79 series. So Gundam inspired the original Macross series, and Macross Transformers is basically almost directly derived from Macross and Gundam. Those are the two strains, but Macross wouldn't have existed without this. So then 20 years go by, And the company that owned Gundam had several different series and things like that, and they were looking for a way to celebrate having a new something to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the original series completing. And in those those intervening 20 years, Yaz had become a fantastic manga artist. So he has still been an animator, and he's still, made a lot of money doing character designs and things like that. But he had a bunch of his own manga. So stuff that's been available in English. There's a series called Venus Wars that was put out by Studio Proteus and Dark Horse in the 80s, and then was eventually adapted into a movie. Really, really exciting, sort of like Robert Heinlein style science fiction about these people who live oppressed on Venus, and then they're basically want to overthrow their government, but they're put down by the government. Really hard science fiction with a great characters and everything like that, and always had these really great designs. And then 20 years after he had done this, they got him to come back and actually make an adaptation of the original series that he worked on. So you'll see from the opening sequence here that in the intervening 20 years, he had not lost a step. On the contrary, he's got a quite amazing style here.
Optimus Prime there. That was one of the reasons I was confused about the dates, actually, because when the Gundam comes in, it looks like older mech design than some of the other mechs. And it was like, wait a second, like this looks like Transformers era kind of stuff.
Right. And I guess that the Yaz's his instructions were that he would be able to that they would let him write and draw it. So he would be in total control of it. And he takes a fairly liberal adaptation of the series. So this color sequence that starts it up, I mean, you really just see what the powers that he has at his command here. I just love the way that he draws the city. He doesn't give it any more detail than it requires.
The city, by the way, is in this big, like, if you don't know anything about this, like I didn't when I read it, it's like Earth has like sent people out into space, and they're in these giant kind of tube cities.
Right.
And the city
Cylinders.
Goes around the like the inside of the cylinder, basically.
Yeah. And a war erupts. This page has a great line: all men grew to fear their own deeds, as this giant cylinder is crashing on Earth. I mean, you just see the scale of the destruction. And we're probably going to hit that word scale a lot here, because I mean, man, the scale shifts here.
Yeah, and here's like the mechs coming in. I'll admit that I didn't understand, even by the end of the book, what exactly the conflict between the two sides were.
Right.
It's just like these two sides are at war, and like that's kind of just okay, that's accepted, and then you get to the character work, I guess. I love this page though, in this scene where they're coming into the city. And I like, what are the two sides? The Frontier and the Zerg or something? The Federation?
Federation. There you go.
And the
Zerg.
The Zerg. So I think these are the Zerg coming into a Federation ship. Love the like shrinking, and then here's your scale stuff. You pull back, and then I love the abstraction on this.
Yeah.
And then goes to
they're entering from the back, essentially, of this construction area of the ship. It's an area of the colony that hasn't been completed, and you see a sequence where they cut their way into the colony after just floating through the nothingness to arrive there. And the amount of confidence that he has to be able to render all of these things at whatever size that he wants to. I mean, it's just like intimidating as hell to even think about it.
Yeah, totally. And these guys, like I said, to me, this looks more modern. There's a number of points where it looks like Masamune Shiro, almost. And that's like when the Gundam shows up, it felt like it's a problem with sci-fi. Like that happens in Star Wars too. Like some of the older stuff versus like they go back and they make episode 1 through 3, but stuff looks more high tech just because it's being made from the future and you can't have like a green screen computer anymore. So I felt a little bit of that with like the design of these guys versus the Gundam. But yeah, here's some more awesome scale stuff. And because of that, I didn't have a sense of how big these mech were until later either. I thought these were just people in suits, like in when I was first going through this opening sequence. I just thought this was Masamune Shiro size suits,
right?
Like a person wearing it and not these giant. So I was a bit confused. At some point, one of them explodes like a new here. Like they get shot into the mech and then the mech explodes. And I was like, why is this thing exploding in such a way that like demolishes a whole ship? And then later on, I realized, oh, because they're freaking gigantic. I can't find the exact page.
Yeah. And they're powered by nuclear reactors inside of them.
Yeah. Here's another thing that made me go looking is like I thought I was reading something from like the 70s or 80s, and then you have these computer graphics like on page 28 here, and I was like, whoa, wait a second. Yeah, this is very contemporary.
One of the most intimidating and impressive things about the artwork to me is how spot on his character designs are from page to page. I mean, he's just so confident. He'll have these extreme expressions on some of the pages, but they always just look exactly like themselves, no matter what size they're at. I don't know if you've ever done this particular thing, Carson, but I've occasionally taken like a head that I've drawn and I've shrunk it on my photocopier, a bunch of different scales, and just sort of studied the scales and studied how weird the adjustment is. It's like he can just render them at any size that he wants to and any expression that he wants to, and he's not afraid of losing the likeness of the character. He'll push the expression really, really far. He'll use the animation technique that we've talked about before, squash and shrink, to show, the extremity of the motion, but he's so confident in it, and he's confident in his ability to draw the character that you'll still recognize him or her, even though they're squashing or shrinking or having these extreme facial expressions.
And like body language, amazing, like with the cartoony faces, but then the super naturalistic. You had me tag this. Yeah. I'm assuming for that.
You got it. The knees together, her reaction to this horrible room. She's taking care of this person who's like her peer, but he's just basically socially inept, living in this total disaster apartment. And he's been studying up, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Amuro Ray. Amuro.
Not even gonna try on any of these.
Yeah. But he's been using his father's access to look at this machine that it turns out is actually the Gundam.
And by the way, shout out to another episode. He needs to go watch the episode that Tori and I recorded earlier today. I don't know if it'll go up before or after this, about Mary Kondo's tidying manga. She can tell him how to get rid of some of those clothes because they give him no joy, and how to tidy up the rest.
Your garbage that you've thrown on the floor, son, does not give you joy.
Yeah. Here's some more cool invasion sequence.
Oh man,
you had this one tagged.
I did. Something about that, the atmosphere of the bottom panel there, where you see the construction grid beyond there, and the easy clean division of the space. You got the foreground there, and then the middle ground element of the opening space,
and the ink wash. I think we both like the ink wash. I tagged it elsewhere. Here's what, the ink wash is like right on there. That creates the distance in the space.
Right. And that's another example of the sort of animation aspect of it. He's just like, oh, this is what I want, I'm going to do it. And if your production staff has to work harder, to make essentially like that area grayscale and everything else black and white, he doesn't care. because that's the way he wants to do it. And it looks fantastic. It's a great technique. And it's super, super unusual because it doesn't reproduce, in a straightforward manner. They would have to do a lot more work to make that fly.
But they actually did it, right? Like I
Yep.
was wondering that when I was looking at this.
Right.
I was looking at it going, this is what Sean would do with this in terms
right.
of like half toning this, but then keeping this all.
Exactly.
Yeah, because the ink wash really reproduced right, but never ruined the rest of the art, which is normally what happens when I see ink wash. So I was very impressed by that.
Yeah, and this was, I believe this was actually in New Type magazine, and super high production values for it. We should say the book is fantastic looking. Oh, there's a great example of the wash. Oh man,
that's where I noticed it really first. This is when one of the mechs gets shot. I think, yeah, like right here, one of the mechs gets shot and blows up and then blows a hole through like this gigantic station. And that's where I was like, whoa, wait a second. Like, what's going on? Because I thought this is like a person-sized thing and it's blowing up. And then, yeah, you get that ink wash effect, but with no detriment to the line art or anything.
right.
So they know what they're doing. Here's a Shiro. That's Shiro to me out through and through. The falling with the shadow, the motion.
Yeah, we should
here's
be
another ink wash.
It should be said, that influence could go both ways. Yaz's big series, Venus Wars, I believe, was the early 80s. It predates any of Shiro's stuff except for his fanzine stuff.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. That's my frame of reference. So I don't know, I've never seen this guy's work before, but just the falling mech suits. And then I was wondering, like, because I didn't know, I was like, okay, is this the classic Gundam? Because it looks older to me, the design of it. Which is funny because in the story it's like the new badass upgrade. And that cuts against itself in a strange way.
Yeah, he's really faithful to his character designs too, from the original series, which are also, more old-fashioned, although there's some touches in terms of how he renders it and stuff that are not particularly time-stamped. I love, for instance, how Amuro Ray has the like scribble tone hair.
I'll have to get to a page of that to see what you're talking about. I noticed a lot of the women look like Osamu Tezuka women.
Yeah,
like
I mean,
the way he draws the faces. Here's the first time I got a sense of how big the actual invaders were, is when they attack these guys here in this like lookout tower, and that's like, oh god, that thing's head's bigger than them. Okay, these are robots. These aren't just guys in suits. When you're talking about scale, that was the first time I really understood the scale and why. Oh, that's why that thing blew up so bad.
Right. And this particular thing, I mean, this is just this whole sequence is terrifying, but it's so artfully done. And he's watching this thing massacre his friends, and he's standing from the side, and the shells are falling down around him, and you can just see how tremendous these shells are. And then the shift that you've got here, I mean, so the shells falling down, and then his other friend being blown by the explosion and blown forward like that. I mean, it's just brutal. You look at her knees coming together like that, and the legs akimbo, and you can see the force of the impact is pushing her spine and her shoulders back while her stomach is going forward. I mean, it's just quite amazing.
Is this the scribble thing you're talking about in the hair, that tone that's in there? Okay.
Yeah, I forgot what that's called. The mezzotint. That's a mezzotint pattern. It's really attractive. I like the mezzotint a lot. I think of that as a nice underused technique. And then that same page right there, that dropout technique is just gorgeous brushwork there.
Well, and he does that a lot where I don't know if I tagged examples of it, but he does that a lot. And it's, I've mentioned a number of times where they won't fill in their blacks in the manga, or maybe like here they'll put the screen tone in it, or they'll just leave things white. And I've always liked that effect, and he does use it exceptionally well. Also does some cool wash just in the hair. It's not always used on these big epic moments. Little wash right there too.
He's so confident with his line work. It's really quite extraordinary. He's got the animator's sense of time, like time is ticking, that is, you know. And you look at this, there's not a single ruled line in the whole series, or I mean in the whole book. If you look at the pen lines for the panel borders, they're all just super confident, fairly quick strokes. So
yeah, they are. He's got a steady hand.
So here's Amuro Ray is basically flipping out. He's gotten his friend he slapped her across the face to get her to stop being hysterical, and has insisted that she get the hell out of there.
And then is looking at the fallen Gundam and thinking, I've never driven one of those before, but let me hop up into that bitch.
And then you see his like hatred. If you go one page, that the pose right there, his face. I mean, it just that's really something else.
And then this thing bearing down on him, and like his anger and sorrow at the same time, but like the determination. And the gun leveling down, like that's an animation moment right there. And then boom.
Sure is. Maintaining the same viewpoint while the character that you're viewing shifts like that. That's a great moment.
Yeah, and then so Amuro runs and like finds his way into the Gundam that his dad built, right? His dad designed it.
Yeah, and he's the thing that he's been obsessively researching is under the blanket. This is a tiny little detail, but like, talk about an animator, man. I mean, just this guy's a master. Look at the tarp. You see the corners of the tarp there, and it has the little brass ring and the reinforcing cloth on it. I mean, it's just like, that is a master animator right there. The dude knows how a tarp is constructed and how it works, and he has drawn it accurately.
And it's moving, like it's pulling
Right.
back and wrinkling the right way. Yeah. The art in this is really stunning. That confident line work you're talking about, also I couldn't find an example exactly to isolate to show, but I kept thinking of Al Williamson in terms of how he inks. And especially the work that Al Williamson did over top of Rick Leonardi in Spider-Man 2099. And some of the little like ships that they fly around in look like some of the little vehicles. But I could not isolate a specific. I think some of it's in the way that these explosion marks, and some of it's in the way he'll go back and forth real quick with the brush, like but it has that like design confident, like the speed and then the confidence to design with your blacks and your line on the fly. That
100% on the fly. And you see like how he controls the lighting, and when there's an explosion or where there's a high contrast, high key lighting, he just pops that black on there, and it's always directional. Look at like the page there on the right, how under the skirt of the armor, you have it a big wedge shape there, because it tells you the direction of the lighting, where that wedge is. I mean, that's just stunning.
I think the stuff I'm looking at, I think this panel would be a really good example right here. The balance of thick and thin lines, and then like you said, the directional mark making. He's not just putting in a shadow flat like on the right, but he's like he's like hatching in, but big thick. This whole panel here feels to me like if someone handed Al Williamson a manga page and then he inked it.
Very interesting.
Like if you look at his Star Wars work too, except his is a little bit more ruled, but I think a lot of that was assistance. It kind of feels like when he's drawing, all the Star Wars droids and AT-ATs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so obviously, there's no reason for Yaz to do the screen tone himself other than indicating it. But like, other than the screen tone, what would you even give an assistant on this? I mean, it's all so characteristic. You imagine trying to rule, or trying to draw this guy's panel borders for him. I mean, what would be the point?
I mean, I could see him having someone like draw the mechs, like someone who's handling like the kind of mechanical perspective, because mechs are so like, you got to get the foreshortening and the kind of dynamism of like a human, but they also have to feel like vehicles. There has to be like a greater sense of linear perspective embedded in them, I would imagine. So I've always been very impressed. Like, I got a buddy, EJ Su, who did a lot of Transformers work and is amazing at mechs, and it just always blows my mind. Or like this panel here, like there's a lot of mechanical precision to that, and I don't know if they're just so good at eyeballing it, or if there is a constructive vanishing point process in that. So I could see an assistant handling some of that, and then him inking on top of it. But
like maybe he would lay out and then have an assistant like essentially like pencil it from a toy or a model kit, and then he goes and does the inks.
I mean, he might. He probably draws it all himself. But you're asking what would an assistant do?
Yeah,
like that would be what I'd have them do. Is like, here's the pose. Go make it actually look right in perspective, and then I'll come back and like make it look cool.
Right. And we get the man. That's a nice brutal fight there. The one being destroyed by the saber light.
Yeah, I noticed that. I was like, oh, there's a laser sword, I think is what they call it.
Right.
The laser saber. Yeah. It's a cool book, man. It's like the art. The story is like mostly like mech porn. It's an excuse to get to the next cool big mech fight, right? But the mech fights are so cool. Like, who cares?
Well, this book, it's not really. This is the first 450 pages of it. I think it's probably it's not until like page 280 or something that you really start to get into some of the character conflicts. And Char, the enemy ringleader, is a formidable. There we go. It's a good.
We'll get a look at that character. Becomes really interesting. Yeah, he's, what do they call him? The red.
Oh, right. His mech has a special speed aspect to it, where it's just not armored at all, so it's super fast.
Here he is.
And that's
kind of goofy design. You can see the older design in here, but that mech looks cool as hell, and especially the colored pages. Like, as much as I love black and white work, and as much as I love what he does in black and white, the color in here is like, it's like, oh man, how cool would this be if this was all painted?
Yaz has done some all painted books, including some things that are still easily available for cheap. If you pick up Joan, if you're enjoying this and you like his color work, Joan is an all color book that he did. That's really wild. It's a biography of Joan of Arc, and then he did a biography of Jesus too, but as far as I know, that's not available in English, unfortunately.
Probably for good reason. But I really like, on the colored work, you'll see where he paints with like acrylic or gouache over top of the watercolors. Like in some of the explosions, I can see the paint. That's kind of abnormal. Normally it's like airbrush effects and stuff. I really like that. Okay, I'm gonna have to look at Joan before this goes live then. Damn it, I've spent so much money this month already, but I really do like his color work.
Yeah, it's stunning. I mean, because his brush work, I mean, he's so committed to the marks that he makes, and also, very similar to Cam Kennedy in some ways. I would say this has a little bit more local color than the Cam Kennedy stuff, but not that much more.
Yeah. Here's a page where I felt like I was looking at some Tezuka women, especially his sci-fi women. This feels, that's from some other artist. I do feel like there's like certain styles of women too that have become popular throughout different artists, like making a look. And I feel like he does switch around between different artists, like standard looks. I'm not familiar enough with the names of some of the older manga artists to know like that's a so and so and that's a so and so, but I'm feeling it. Like
Yeah.
this is who was that short program that we looked at?
Oh, Adachi. Yeah.
That looks like an Adachi face. This looks more like Tezuka. Like
Yeah.
I'm just seeing things like that.
Yeah, and if you think about where the animation comes from, the design in animation, your goal is to make a design that is replicatable by lots of different people. Not one dude is sitting there drawing all 20,000 frames that you're going to see of this one character. And so good design means differentiating them visually so that no matter what the size that they're going to be seeing or the coloration that they're going to be seeing, they're always going to be distinct. And so yeah, you get a certain amount of like picking and choosing.
And
But
this sequence here with this character's going through a whole range of expressions at different sizes, hair colored in, not colored.
yeah,
That's where you're talking about on model. And he
right,
seems to reference a particular style of anime or manga different from like this character here.
right.
And you see that throughout the faces. And I think that helps him. We're talking about like style swiping and stuff. That's a good reason to do it because it differentiates the characters too. Like this feels like a very different manga to me than this. This looks way older. This feels more contemporary. And those characters differentiate and kind of have character because of that. It's smart.
Yeah. Well, we haven't really talked much about the adaptation. I think it's safe to say that Vertical did an outstanding job on this.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like you said, the production is
Yeah, which would have been all down to New Type, or yeah, I believe it was New Type, the magazine that this ran in. But yeah, it's just flawless, and this would have been camera. This is all pre-digital in terms of the production of the book and everything.
2001. Yeah.
So not that there wasn't digital printing, but this was produced, this was produced on board and then shot with a camera, and then presumably the negatives scanned at some point.
Well, they did a damn good job. So one of the aspects that I like later in the story is they build like the ragtag Gundam team. And it's like all of the bad guys are all like professionals versus a bunch of kids who've only ever been in the suits like as of 5 minutes ago. And that creates a lot of comedy and drama. And I think that's what you're saying. The character stuff picks up more because you really start to get more invested in the crew.
Right.
And I like that. And this scene here really drove it home for me. Because at first you're like, man, you got this kid who just jumped in this thing and he like killed 5 professionals and now he's fighting like the scariest dude. And I'm not going to buy into it. But you have this scene here where the pro comes in and he's going to charge and do like a football takedown on one of the kids. And like in a super professional move. But the kid does an unexpected thing by freaking out and moving in an unexpected way and winds up knocking the guy going for the takedown out with his shoulder gun and falls down, and they're like, oh shit. And then the other kid just takes advantage of it and just blows the enemy to pieces. And that's really funny. It's really good comedy, but that has a sense of realism in it too, from having done some fighting, like having trained a little bit. There is always an aspect of a really trained fighters. There's like, you do this, I do that. There's an expected set of moves. And an amateur sometimes can get something off on a pro because they just do stuff you're not supposed to do, or they react in a janky way and cause an accident like that. And when you're talking about like well observed, but also like helping sell the very unsellable, unbelievable, that seemed really potent to me.
There's another very potent example of that where the commander, the aged commander, says, well, the enemy's here. I'm gonna have to go approach him and we're gonna talk. We're gonna make sure that we abide by the rules of the peace treaty. And he turns to this kid and he's like, you're gonna be in charge. And the guy's like, me? And he's like, well, you got high marks in your captaining class, right? And then he gets in his ship and he goes off and they blow the hell out of him.
Yeah.
And so the kid who had high marks in his captaining class is now in charge temporarily.
But also, like, you've got the youth and the new outlook, and that counts for something. This is a cool scene too, where they're like hand bringing a rocket through.
Yeah. I was reluctant to use the word realism, but I think that is an attempt that they have made here, as far as making all of these elements plausible, and that includes this fight here, which is quite awesome. With the Char is actually on board their ship, and he's confronted by this new recruit who's holding him by gunpoint, and him being the irredeemable, beautiful male villain that he is, he's basically like, well, what are you gonna do? And she's like, well, take off your helmet. He's like, okay. And she's like, take off your mask. And he's like, sure, whatever you want. And then he kicks a wrench at her and just
and she's stunned by like, oh my god, you're so handsome. And again, blonde bad guy or light-haired bad guy in the manga, which always cracks me up, that like that's the whitey evil blonde guy. And then
perfectly symmetrical, slightly cat eyes and this, gorgeous flowing hair and everything. And he just beats the hell out of her.
Catcher in this sexy almost kiss pose. This is, by the way, the moment that Tori, I know you haven't watched it, but the moment Tori walked out of the new Batman movie is when Catwoman and Batman get in a fight, and he gets into almost this exact same pose of pinning her on a table while he's between her legs, and he like leans in, and they have this little bit like, yeah, Catwoman and Batman are gonna fuck, and she was like, this is enough, and then she just walked out of the room. So
in this case, it's worth noting this is the villain. It's not the hero.
Yeah. But like it sets up where you understand that there may be some further romantic complications between the two sides. Whether I don't know whether he's assaulting her. I mean, he's obviously assaulting her from like a physical fight standpoint, but there seems to be a romantic, like she seems to kind of be taken by him, and I don't know how that plays out because it doesn't show up in the rest of this, but
or at least intimidated by him physically, not just like intimidated like he's going to attack me, but some other kind of intimidation. And I should say I have no idea where this goes. I am a huge fan of his other manga, but I have never watched this series. I kind of feel like I shouldn't watch it until I've read the manga, because I know that he's taking a lot of liberties with this as he's going. Do you know how many volumes there are of this?
I don't know. I was like, well, I'm gonna get it and see if I like it, because like big spaceship robot stuff, especially stuff that I think is like classic, it's like, okay, that like there's got to be a reason why it's so popular, but it's not the thing that I'm gonna go get until you're like, hey, we should really look at this. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna get one and see how it looks, and then it's like, okay, yeah, the art's awesome, the reproduction's awesome, the story's like, it's getting somewhere more interesting as it goes. So I didn't look at how many more there are yet, but it's definitely on the list of like, I'll be getting the rest of them for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, and we should. I would just like to give a really strong recommendation to, if you're watching this right now, after Carson has grabbed his copies, I would really highly recommend that after you pick up this, you pick up the Venus Wars, and pick up. He had an earlier series. It's not quite as good, called Rebel Sword. And then the color one that was available in the late 90s, early 2000s is called Joan, and that's a 3-volume biography of Joan of Arc. and really stunning color work throughout the entire thing there. Really a great read. And there's something else that I wanted to say, but I don't recall exactly what it was.
There's looking at the color work in here. I'll shout out a book that I think that we should talk about at some point. I've been wanting to talk about it and I've been saving it. So maybe we'll get to it at some point, but shout it out in case we don't. There's a book. I'm gonna blank on the artist's name. It's a Japanese artist. It was printed in Japan. I don't think I have it here where I can grab it, called Seizen and Comic Girl. And it's a manga that's completely in color, and it was published in Japan completely in color and has really beautiful colors like in this book. So if you're looking for more cool colored manga, just because we're talking about it, Seizen and Comic Girl, similar type of space exploration, just fun, blow 'em up space epic stuff, but really beautiful art with stellar coloring.
It I should mention, like, I didn't even know this had come out. Somebody I follow on Twitter showed a few pictures of a few volumes, and I was super excited because, as far as I knew, there hadn't been anything else by him come out in English. But I basically stopped reading comics from 2012 to 2019 or something, 2020, and so I've got this big gap, and this happened to have come out in that gap. And I would have been all over this because I've just been clamoring for more of his stuff in English. I think he's a fantastic cartoonist. He's so confident, and I really admire the way that he can just take. One of the things we talked about with Ken Matroni is like taking this object and being able to just move it around in his head. And it's a dying art, and it's a really stunning thing when you see somebody who has just total command of it. I mean, and I think that he's right up there with anybody that I've ever seen in terms of that.
Well, and that's where I said, like, he's probably just good enough that he doesn't need to rule out the perspective. He can just turn that mech, which is, to me, like, the proportions have to be measured and all of that. And you get the sense that he just boop, 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 boop. And you go jump off a bridge and, quit and hate yourself and hate him and everything when you look at artwork like this, for sure. Yeah. So thanks for exposing me to it. I appreciate it. I definitely, totally. I no matter, even on a quick flip through, no matter, like, I would have just been like, Gundam, whatever. So I appreciate the push.
Well, we're now one step closer to you having to watch Neon Genesis Evangelion.
I watch it. Can I read it?
Yeah, you should read it too. You should do both.
Nah, I don't like watching. I don't like animation. No one ever gets it when I say that. Like when you like comics, how do you not like anime?
It's different.
I don't like it moving. I really don't like watching drawings move. I don't know why. So this was an anime first, right?
It was an anime first. This is the 20-year anniversary adaptation of it. The Neon Genesis Evangelion manga was done concurrently with the series. So, the first couple episodes of it came out before the animation. So, it's great too. It's really great. Yeah, you should read the first volume of that.
As a property, it was anime first, because a lot of properties start as manga, and then, like, if it's a good one, then you get an anime. But this looked like it was an anime that then got a manga.
Yes, exactly. And probably wouldn't have happened if Yaz had not been, successful mangaka in the intervening 20 years. I think that's a big part of it.
There's been other Gundam mangas that aren't as successful, right? Like, as the property, there's been a bunch, because when I was trying to find this, it caused a problem.
Yeah, but those are sort of more perfunctory. I know I don't want to badmouth anybody. I think that those are more perfunctory. Hey, you like that? Why don't you spend your money on this kind of stuff? Whereas this is like, they've just let him go. I mean, he makes a story that he wants to make with that as like the sort of guideline. This is like a second draft of it,
Yeah.
And he really lets go. It doesn't feel to me like a commercial proposition. I mean, I know that's silly because obviously it's a huge commercial proposition, but you get the feeling that he has control in a way that you wouldn't typically in that type of situation. And you read the editorial in the back that's written by the guy who's essentially in charge of marketing the Gundam stuff and keeping it going, and he's like thrilled. He's like, I can't believe that we got him to do this. It's like a 2-page editorial. Like, we got him to come back and do it. And the reason, he walks you through the process and everything. And I believe him. I think that they were like, oh, this guy outgrew this thing. He didn't spend 20 years talking about Gundam. I'm sure it was not like on the top of his list of things that he wanted to talk about when he gave an interview or whatever. But they gave him the freedom to just take it and make it his own, and he did. And there's also a brief appreciation in the back by Hiroke Anno, who is the director and one of the writers on Evangelion. And he basically says in his interview that essentially this is like a twofold influence on him. Like the original Gundam was a huge influence on him, and now this is like inspiring him for the next whatever it is that he's going to do. And totally believe it, because you can see this adaptation definitely pulls from Evangelion in a little bit. There's a conversation happening between the two different things, and and not dissimilar to the way that the Evangelion manga, which was one of the character designers for the show, did the manga. And like I said, the first couple chapters were released before the show ever came out, and it ran past the show, and so that is sort of a similar kind of conversation that this book is having with the original series. Just in this case, it happens to be 20 years removed instead of like 2 or 3. That
would be so cool though. You're like, oh, I love this thing. I'm influenced by it. It's like one of my major landmarks. And then they come out and you're like, oh, but they were influenced by me a bit. Like right. that would have to be so satisfying as a creator. That's awesome.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it was tremendously inspirational. And he was willing to go back to the well after that and do essentially a reimagining of his own series. So I'm sure that was influential. But yeah, well, thanks for talking with me about this, and thanks for taking a chance on it.
My pleasure.
It's a great one, and maybe one day we'll get Venus Wars back in print again. But you could still pick up some cheapo copies of that, as far as I know. People always correct me on this; they're all gone. As far as I know, you can still get cheapo copies of Venus Wars on eBay or something like that. But
well, there's like 5 cheapo copies, and then people go grab those. They're talking about how much that Walt Simonson. Someone was talking about that Walt Simonson book today, and I was like, I mean, the artist editions are like $100-something bucks, and I think I got it for 150, so that didn't seem too much overpriced. So I don't know if the 3 that were reasonably priced have gone, now they're the 300s. I don't know how that works.
Yeah,
but
it doesn't take many to sell. Yeah,
get it now, I guess.
Yeah, speaking of getting it now, let me tell you about this book called The Strange Death of Alex Raymond.
Tell me about it.
Well, it's about this guy named Alex Raymond.
Yeah,
and how he died strange that he
in
died,
a strange way, in a car crash. Here's a car crash picture. He didn't go off a cliff like that, but
it is a wild book and a wild ride, and you're never quite sure who's in the driver's seat.
No.
I want to tell you, if you have not picked up this book yet, I would really heartily recommend that you do so. At the very minimum, find a copy to page through, and once you have touched its pages and caressed its spine, verified that all of them are there, there's some Carson pages there. It is quite the read and quite an enjoyable book, and we have some other books coming out too, but the one that's available right now is Strange Death of Alex Raymond. It is a hell of a book, so I hope that you pick it up.
And if you want like super confident bombastic manga, what have you got coming forward for them?
Super confident bombastic manga. Plaza by Yuichi Yokoyama is very, very bombastic. It might be the loudest comic I've ever read. You're practically guaranteed to hear a bunch of fairground noises when you open it up. It is a feast for the sight and the sound.
For the eye ears.
For the eye ears, exactly. in September. There's actually a review that just popped up on Goodreads that I was very gratified to see from a gentleman from the Netherlands. No, I'm not sure if it was the Netherlands or Norway. Norway, I think, who said, this is the only book that it has ever physically pained me to read. I read 10 pages at a time because I couldn't stand to read any more than that.
and
it's incredible.
Yeah, it's the best. Yeah, his work is overwhelming, but I love it. I absolutely love it. You're going to get a reputation for painful books that people love.
Extremity, I'm interested in extremity. Like all the books that we've announced so far have something about them that's really extreme.
Yeah.
To me, like, you just got to commit, like whatever it is that the thing is that you want. Strange Death of Alex Raymond is very committed. It's committed to being itself. It does the thing that it's going to do, and it does it to its maximum capability. Plaza is the most Yokohama-y you can get. It's like it's maximum Yuichi Yokoyama. It's the most Yokoyama you can get.
Yeah.
He has turned the Yokoyama up to 11.
And Yokoyama's already at 13. So
Right.
it's like the 13 goes to 11. And I mean, I just, same thing. I love comics like that. So look forward to that. Yeah. Thanks so much for introducing me to this one, Sean. And thank you everyone for following along.
Yeah, and hopefully next week we'll have something from Carson. We've got a good list going right now, and we really do appreciate it. And hey, check out our Patreon. We're doing stuff there too. Always something exciting there. I think the most recent thing is a bunch of pictures of me scanning a giant pile of pages. We'll find out soon what that is.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.